The sun lifts out of its blue envelope through a long line of sea-soaked pillars, basting in the low tide ripples, like soldiers swimming, guarding history.
One of the best things about Revere Beach was when Charles Eliot designed it at the end of the 19th century, he made sure that it was a public beach, and it has remained a public beach for almost 100 years.
His vision of not only Revere Beach, but of all the metropolitan areas for parks and recreational sites was that this is public land and it should be used for a public purpose. And many homes and hotels and amusements were built right on the sand, right on the beach.
By eminent domain, through an act of the legislature, the MDC was able to take all the buildings off the beach. They had so many days to remove the buildings, or sell them, or tear them down, or else the MDC would auction them off.
He acquired the whole strip of beach land, was able to remove a lot of the homes were like shacks, really, a lot of the small little shacks that were on the beach, and to push it back. Some of the amusements were already there, but as they deteriorated, they would be removed or moved further back.
The narrow gauge railroad ran right down the boulevard. See, the narrow gauge railroad was built in 1875, and originally it ran close to the ocean. Mr. Eliot, he had to make sure that the tracks coming out of Beachmont stayed to the west about 400 or 500 yards on the roadbed. A new roadbed was built where the MBTA is running today, the Blue Line. And so he took all that, cleared that off, and then he said, now, buildings that are going to be put up on the other side, on the west side of the boulevard, which was renamed from Railroad Avenue, he said the buildings had to be a certain height, certain this, and they had to be X number of dollars, had to be there to make them nice and uniform, and there was a lot of restrictions. But he was the man. If it wasn't for his foresight, Revere Beach would never be what it had today. But see, people don't know this history, and when they don't know the history, they don't realize what went into building this beach. how much forethought went in it. You hear men today talk about environmental affairs. Charles Eliot had these in the back of his mind in 1896, just about 100 years ago.
When they took the beach and everything was taken down where we all had to retire, and that was the end of an era. From 1896, my dad started with his brother on Revere Beach, to 1978. The Hurley name was always somewhere or other on the beach.
Two Hurley brothers came to Revere Beach about 1895. One was John Hurley, and he had 3 sons. And the other was Fred Hurley, and he had, I think, 8 children. So they were the ones that really started Revere Beach. And for 70-odd years, the Hurleys and the Hurley families and the children and grandchildren and probably great-grandchildren worked Revere Beach. John Shea was very much of a pioneer at Revere Beach. And he and his partner, Mr. Savag, I guess was the name, they built the Cyclone. And then I know that the Bluebird's Palace was very famous. Along anybody would come to Revere Beach, I always remember Bluebird's Palace. That was another fun house. But he was very innovative. Those years, they thought about something, and then when it came here, if it didn't work, they got rid of it, and they thought about something new. So he was very always thinking. He always wanted something new.
I guess he just, had great imagination. And my father, one time, with the permission of the federal government, went to Oklahoma and brought a whole tribe of Indians to the beach. And he had to assure the government that they'd have a place to live and their transportation back and their transportation, to and from. And they spent a whole summer there. They had an Indian show. They'd dance and around, and it was quite an act. That was, I don't remember that. It was before my time, but my mother used to tell me about it all the time. Then after World War I, they bought a submarine, and they'd take people out in the harbor. Never amounted to anything. That venture lost money. My father got killed on the Cyclone when I was 2 years old. So I really don't have, a real remembrance of him just through my mother and my brother and my sister. But he was an entrepreneur. He'd take a chance at everything. He was very daring. He was a man that would take a gamble in business. There was maybe a half a dozen other people like my father on the beach at that time. The Hurleys, the Ridgeways, there were a lot of people that saw the potential of it and were willing to invest. It was like when movies first come out. Who never thought they'd click? But people that had a little gambling, you know, they took a shot at it.
The beach can actually be divided into two distinct periods. The first period, before the narrow gauge railroad was constructed in 1875, and the second stage, which of course was around the turn of the century when the narrow gauge railroad brought so many people to Revere, and especially right here to Beachmont.
We had a tremendous influx of people. The narrow gauge was the greatest thing that ever happened, and I hated to see it go. I think I cried the day they closed it up because I loved it so.
It seemed to open up the whole Revere Beach, and especially it opened up Beachmont, because Beachmont was just a barren hilltop.
After 1875, Revere and, of course, Beachmont began to grow by leaps and bounds. And by the turn of the century, the narrow gauge was one of the busiest railroads in the country.
I used to have a system whereby I ran up Beachmont, the Bradstreet Hill, and down to the train. That was my exercise for the day.
The fee was like 10 cents to get in at the time, 1906 to 1911. But then you went inside and the rides were a dime or a nickel. The merry-go-rounds were 5 cents. And the Indian village, Japanese village, and they would have a parade of Alice in Wonderland and all the storybook characters would happen every day, 3 o'clock, and also at 7 o'clock at night. And she would have the floats, just as you see Mickey Mouse today. And all the people that worked there, the guards, they had all these beautiful bright red jackets and red hats and white pants, and they would be on the floats and marching in the bands behind them.
I rode the chutes, and I went down Hell Gates. Hell Gates, there was 2 trains went down, and as they went down, left the station to go on around, there was 2 big red devils with horns on their heads and pitchforks in their hands, going to stick them right through your stomach. Oh, we got scared to death. And then, of course, there was a good many skeletons. It was all scary through there. You could hear the yelling for way off when those cars left. Everybody wondering what's going on.
I spent many happy vacations at Revere Beach during the first decade of the century. Although I was a very young child, I recall many things in great detail. However, one recollection puzzles me very much. I associate seeing a number of premature babies being cared for in a building where people could enter to view them. Surely that cannot be a figment of my imagination. I would appreciate any information you could give me concerning this strange memory. I should add that I connect the building with Wonderland or in its vicinity. Sincerely, Helen E. Dalton, Honolulu, Hawaii, July 11th, 1979.
For 5 cents you could go in and walk around at the brass rail and see all newborn babies that were under 5 pounds to qualify to be in the hospital in Wonderland Park until they're out of danger. They had the buildings built so the front of two big apartment houses would burn. The other apartments would not burn. They were made out of sheet metal. So they would set these fires going every night at the evening performance around 8 o'clock. And they would have a little skit going on in front of the apartment where the bar room, and some would start a fight in the bar room, and then the paddy wagon would come and they would pick up the man and take him in the paddy wagon and arrest him. And then a fire would start in the paint shop or near the Chinese laundry, and then the fire department, which Wonderland Park owned equipment that was equivalent to what the town of Revere had, and it would rescue people over the ladders. It would hire retired firemen from many of the big cities and come there and work for the summer.
Many of the attractions at Wonderland Park at the turn of the century were very expensive to put on. And in fact, one of the attractions was an honest-to-goodness Wild West show that they brought from I believe, out in Nevada to Wonderland Park. Another attraction was a man who went up in a blimp. And actually, there were parachute jumps and things like that. And every year it seemed more and more expensive to put on these attractions. And that is what eventually led to the demise of Wonderland Park, which was only around from 1906 to 1911.
1910, they had a kind of a bad year because the season wasn't that great. See, like on the beach, if you don't make your expenses by the 4th of July, you're in trouble. So they had several bad weekends, I guess, and they started to go downhill because they had a big payroll and they just wanted to do a good job, and they just couldn't keep it up with the money that was coming in.
If there's one thing that we could say about Wonderland Park, despite its short existence, is that it led to Revere Beach itself being built up and many of the roller coasters and other amusements being constructed there.
They have a roller coaster. They have corkscrew roller coasters today, and they have some that go around and go right up and make a loop upside down. That didn't happen in those days. Although when you think of the engineering in those days, it was pretty good considering what they had to work with.
One time Revere Beach had 4 coasters. The Cyclone, Thunderbolt, the Derby Racer, and the Lightning. I liked the Thunderbolt because that was one of the first big rides that had a good dip to it. And then after that, the Cyclone was put up. I think Shabe and Chabag owned that as a corporation. And that had a much higher structure, and the hills were much steeper. And then there was one called the Lightning. It was an all-steel coaster. And that was a beauty. I remember fighting to get in the front car with my brother-in-law. We got in the front car, and get hit for jumping in it before it stopped. And boy, that first dip, it was facing the Crescent Gardens, and you'd think you were going right into that Crescent Gardens, and all of a sudden you go right down, and then it was a perpendicular curve that you took right around. I love roller coasters, but that one really kind of slowed me down a bit.
When you went down that hill, it was a thrilling experience.
Tell you right now, when they had fatalities, it wasn't the ride's problem. You can't take anybody that stands up drunk and keep them on a ride once it's out of your control. A roller coaster you have no control over once it leaves. None. Well, the cars weren't running. I had locked them in myself, but some friends of the owners came, and they sat in one car, and they decided to take a ride. So somebody released the clog, and the car went off. Well, then they realized that I was down below what I was doing. They said they yelled and yelled for me, but naturally you can't hear a thing. Everything makes so much noise. And that's how the car come and hit me. Once it leaves that station, oh yeah, you can stop it before it goes over the big hill, because that is a motor-driven chain that pulls it up. But every time somebody get killed on the beach, it was the same thing. On the Skywheel, when they had the Skywheel accidents down there, it was 2 sailors get killed down there, both the same thing. They stood up in the seats, up in the top, and they fell off. Well, they weren't made to stand up in the seats. And on the roller coaster, I think Bob's father got killed, and he was out inspecting it. He probably fell off it. I was jumping over the tracks at the same time, and they said the car hit me, and I bounced back, and it hit me the second time. The front of the car was 1 3/4 ash, and then they showed me months later that front of that car all broken where it hit me. I broke that 1 3/4 ash. It wouldn't seem possible. Well, I'm still here now after 92 years.
Spook Street, this horror show where if you walk through dark passageways and you're looking at the various sets we had, they were worked by a mechanical shaft up in the air and photoelectric cells, and you'd come to a corner and a big ghost would blow up in front of you, and we had people sitting there, and we had by pulleys that open a trunk, and a skunk would get out of the trunk and that sort of thing. And as you came up the stairs, you'd shake hands with a robot. I remember making a robot for my dad, and that let the fellow upstairs know that people were going out. And this fellow had an air hole there, and as the girls went by, you'd blow their dresses up in the air, and it was quite an attraction that people would be way out to the sidewalk trying to see it. And that was a good show. It was a good money getter. The Nautical Gardens was a big building on that property then. And Pop Ridgway built that. He was an old Grand Army Republican man. It was in the Civil War. And he was very friendly with my dad because my dad's father, Timothy Hurley, was in the Civil War. And he served two hitches. He was in there for 2 years and he came home. And things at home, you know, there was nothing doing. So there was a doctor that was drafted. And in them days when you were drafted, if you didn't wish to go, you could pay me and I'd go for you, which you can't do now. So this doctor was drafted and he paid my grandfather so much and he went back into the Civil War. He was at the Battle of Gettysburg. He was wounded. And so that's why we were so friendly with Pop Ridgway.
Ridgway was a great inventor. I think he had patented over 60 patents in the U.S. government for his funhouse in the pit. The pit was in the building where the Nautical Gardens was. In the later years, you get fascinated, and I always fascinated with the carousels that we had at Revere Beach. And the more I studied, I found out that we had great, great carousels from very, very famous carvers. And in fact, the best ones we had probably were before my time. In 1906, 1907, 1908, we had something like 6 and 7 carousels. Point of Pines had one, Oak Island had one. And then they had 3 on the beach, and then they had one at Wonderland Park that Mr. Bopp, who also owned a lot of stuff on Revere Beach. So we were like the carousel capital of the world, probably without bringing in Coney Island. I mean elaborate carousels. Carousels that were all built in this country, but they were carved by immigrants that come over, and they were great furniture carvers from Austria, Russia, Italy, France, great furniture carvers. But the Revere Beach had those. I only wish that we had saved one, because that would have been really nice to have a carousel back at Revere Beach, because when you put a youngster on there from 1 year old to 10 or 12 years old, it's so relaxing to see them sitting there and going around with a smile from ear to ear.
don't know if there's any of that family left, but I hope they hear what I say. But it truly was, I could stand across the street from Rotherham's by the hour and be perfectly happy. The good smells of the Frankfurts being grilled and the taffy and all that sort of thing. There were so many good things about it, you know, as far as I'm concerned. There ain't nothing as good. It was just the greatest.
I did everything. Wrapped popcorn, packaged chips, sold tonic, hot dogs, saltwater taffy. Then I graduated to my one and only job, which was cotton candy girl. My oldest uncle, James Rotherham, started the business. He was a confectioner first, and then he went to the beach and decided this is something he would like to do, the popcorn business. So in the meantime, my father came over from England, then eventually settled in Revere, and he went into partnerships with his brother. The other brother decided he would go in the business, and then he wasn't quite satisfied, so he went on his own too. He had a shooting gallery. And they had several things on the beach, and then they had to decide at one point, because their popcorn business got so big, whether they would be in amusements or they would be concessionaires. So they decided that they would go the route of popcorn making. The first thing my father owned on his own was the American Lunch, which was, needless to say, Kellys say they were the first ones that sold roast beef sandwiches in Revere, but they weren't. My father's American Lunch had the roast beef sandwiches there. So we had little competition between them.
That we didn't have any idea that in Kelly's that it was going to be that successful. So it was just Frank McCarty and myself and a fellow, Joe Nugent, and that was down there, and I think a fellow that was a pilot that was a friend of ours who wasn't in the rest of business, Eddie Weaver, he was down there. And when it opened, we cooked 2 roast beefs only, so we didn't know how roast beef was going to sell, or whether people would accept it or not. And it sold so quickly that it was unbelievable. It wasn't. We had 2 roast beefs, and I think in 20 minutes we sold all the roast beef sandwiches we could make. It was the first time that anybody, I think we were the first to ever do it around here, at least, I don't know how far, to sell a hot roast beef sandwich. So these were hot. And then, of course, as you used them, they did get a little warm. You wouldn't always get a hot sandwich. You'd get a warm sandwich, because most of the roast beef that was sold around in delis was cold. But other times you used to get a hot roast beef sandwich would be roast beef on 2 pieces of bread with gravy poured on top of it. This was just a real sandwich coming off onto a roll, just the juice of the meat, you know. It was quite an accomplishment, the roast beef, and then from then on in, it generated into what it is. It was just a proving ground that people really loved the hot roast beef sandwich.
Marathon dance were very popular in 1931 and 32, and they would have all these dances. They come from across the United States to compete, because that day's $1,000 first prize was a lot of money to be able to garner and take home. So they would start dancing somewhere around the 1st of June, and they would dance 45 minutes out of every hour, and the other 15 minutes we divided, so you had 11 minutes to wash up and 4 minutes to get back on the floor. So one couple, they were dancing for quite a while, and became, I guess, into August, and they decided they were going to get engaged. So they got engaged, and that was part of the attraction down there. When people come in, and they would sit in the grandstand seats. I think they paid $25 to get in. And this couple, they managed to get them on a flatbed truck. They danced up the ramp to the flatbed truck. They danced all the way to City Hall as they drove up there. They backed the truck up at City Hall, put the boards across. They danced across into the City Hall, city clerk's office. They got their marriage license and danced back on the truck again, then back down on the dance floor. And for the following 2 or 3 weeks after that, it was all preparation for the wedding, who was going to be in the wedding party and all the rehearsals, but they kept dancing all the time. And they were married at Revere Beach.
I was about 8 years old, and they had the rafts out on the water, and the rafts always would get loaded with people, and they'd sink. So the lifeguard used to be always, I used to have a pair of water wings, and of course my mother'd be sitting right up on the beach, you know, and watching me. But he never wanted me to go out on that raft, even with the water wings, because they, you know, he was afraid I'd get drowned. But I always used to sneak, and I'd go out there and I'd get on the raft. So one day, just for spite, he pushed me. He was only kidding, you know, he was watching me. But he pushed me in the water, and the water wings went down around my feet. And I started to swim, and I swam to the shore. And that was about 100 yards off from the shore. So that's how I learned to swim, you know, without water wings. I had to swim around the beach and everything, and then finally everybody tried to coax me to go into the big swim. And I was about 15 years old then, and there was a swim in Boston Lake. And I tried it, and I didn't make it the first time. So then the second time I went to the lake was when I was 16. And I swam it, and I have the record, 6 hours and 14 minutes.
I was 6 years old, and the first thing they did, my aunt was active in the Veterans of Foreign Wars Women, and she put me into a show with blackface, you know. And at that time, the makeup wasn't as good as it is now. And the first thing that I sang that I was here is, gee, but it's great after being out late, walking my baby back home. I'm still singing it. Arm in arm over meadow and farm, walking my baby back home. Ba 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 ba. That's it. We had these side shows with wonderful singers and dancers. And later on, we had the Frolic, where we had the best entertainers.
Sammy Davis Jr. at the Frolic with the Will Jackson Trio. He was a little kid. He must have been 5, 6 years old when he was with that trio. But they entertained at the Frolic. We had Dinah Washington at the Frolic. Jerry Vale was at the Frolic. Jackie Mason. I think the Frolic had the top entertainment in the country. A lot of people don't realize that Barbra Streisand was at the Frolic at one time. When she just came off her tour in New York, she had 1 week of a club in New York, and my uncles Harry and Mike Delarusso booked her for a week, and she came to Revere Beach Frolic for 1 week of entertainment. She was a young kid at the time, just starting out, and nobody even knew who Barbra Streisand was, and she was a hit at the Frolic. And from there, she left Revere Beach, went entertaining somewhere else, and she got the part in Boston in that theater group, The Funny Girl.
But you have to realize that as kids, we used to stand outside and look in at all of these things, just dreaming that one day we'd maybe be able to afford to go in to see them or to hear them or whatever. And it was really a wonderful time.
It's been a long line. I mean, you know, I've been reading a lot of interviews lately with Jimi Hendrix, and he played on Revere Beach with Little Richard back in the early 60s at it was the Ebb Tide at the time, you know. And there was a lot of bands that were down there, Chuck Berry, a lot of, you know, big names played down on Revere Beach. And I can remember being young and walking down and seeing the Wild Ones, and these guys had these big wigs like Kiss almost, you know what I mean? And they were playing like the Shipwreck. And I was like, wow, and I was like, I want to go in and see rock and roll, you know, I want to see a band play. And later on, there we were playing, you know, on Revere Beach and looking out the window and seeing all kids looking in with that same look that I must have had. You know what I mean? But in a whole, there was so, you could walk down the beach when you were young and there was like 20 nightclubs with bands, music pouring out, and we were excluded, you know?
I believe that if we stayed as we were and kept that era going with that kind of entertainment and that kind of a beachfront, I think we could have been the entertainment and the resort area in the country.
Nobody's been in my room. Your silhouette still shines in the gloom. Oh, nobody's been in my bed. It's so empty now since the day when you said goodbye. Nobody's been in my room. Oh no. Nobody's been in my life. I let no one in. I keep the door closed. Oh, nobody's been at my table. I eat alone. I cook what I'm able. Nobody's been in my life since you've been gone. Ooh, nobody's been in my life. You're the only one. But in the still of the night, I can feel her around. She's a ghost in the shadows. Whoa, nobody's been in my heart. They stay a while. They leave when they've had enough. No one's been in my bed. It's so lonely now since the day when you said goodbye. Nobody's been in my heart since you've been gone. Ooh, nobody's been in my heart. You're the only one. Yeah. She's a ghost in the shadows. Out all alone. She's a ghost in the shadows. I say, oh, she's a ghost in the shadows. Whoa, she's a ghost in the shadows.
To the Revere Police Department, July 9th, 1987. I have recently learned that apparently a Sydney girl named Annette Kellerman scandalized Revere in the first decade of this century when she appeared on Revere Beach in a boys' racing swimsuit. She was arrested and in a blaze of publicity was charged with indecent exposure. Subsequently, Miss Kellerman rebuilt the top of her swimsuit to cover her neckline and sewed black stockings onto the legs. Thus, it was claimed that the world's first ladies' one-piece swimsuit was created. The purpose of my letter is to seek your assistance and advice on how I might obtain a copy of the court case against Miss Kellerman. Yours faithfully, Peter Fox, New South Wales.
You deny that you appeared at Revere Beach in a flimsy piece of material that barely covered your...
I admit I wore a one-piece bathing suit. I do not admit it was indecent.
What other definition would you apply? Your arms, neck, and shoulders were exposed.
When the beach was running, there was never any drive-in theaters, number one. And the drive-in theaters used to have little amusements in there, and you'd pay so much to go in and put the kids in the back seat, and you'd go in there. Next came out these cookouts that you could have at home. You could make popcorn at home, you could make hamburgers, hot dogs, and everything out in your yard, and a deck.
It was an evolution of the automobiles coming in, so people could go and they could go to Canby Lake, they could go to Salem Willows, they could go all over the place, didn't have to come to Revere Beach. And that was one part of it. Then the swimming pools in your backyard came in, and that took another group of people away from the beach.
Night baseball took away a lot of people, and then they opened up the gin mills on Sundays, and women were allowed to go in. That took away the people, and each little thing took so many people from the beach. Then when automobiles got so popular, young people could come down there. If they didn't like what they seen, they'd drive off and go somewhere else. Years ago, you'd come down on the streetcar, and you were down for the day.
The big time men, pioneers, they started fade out, fade away, and the people who replaced them didn't put the money back into the places. Other than the Hurleys and Mr. Fox, they didn't put that much money back into the buildings. The Shabs did a good job. As I say, the few old timers that stuck it out to the very end, they put money back into the beach. But the small people that leased the place for one season, 2 seasons, they were part of the problem. Because they took the money and they made in the summer, went to Florida, come back, and they didn't improve the beach, the buildings or anything like that.
They rode on the rides not knowing that you were gonna come off them. You know, it deteriorated so bad that, you know, as a kid, you don't think of that. You're having a hell of a time. You don't care if the car flies off. You don't think of that.
It was just the times, really. It wasn't that people had stopped coming. The taxes had got so high and the insurances had got so high that the owners of all the property on the beach didn't have any money to keep modernizing it. It just escalated. You know, you can only price something at such a point and you keep going and it just doesn't sell anymore. I think that's what happened.
Way back, you know, when I was a kid, there was an element of greed involved, and people were not thinking about keeping it beautiful, and there was not a lot of, it was just make a quick buck. Make a quick buck, and that's that. So people did whatever they could to make a quick buck. There wasn't not that I know of anyway, the merchants didn't all get together and have a fund that kept it beautiful, and maybe kept on the city councilors to keep the grandstands going and keep the sand clean, and so when things got run down on the beach, then business tailed off on the make a quick buck stands, and in hand, one by one, they fled.
Oh, that anybody wanted to claim they owned anything. I'm not sure that they weren't operating with a lease to the city. I think the city might have taken the property for taxes, and they were leasing the property from the city at the end. I'm willing to bet that.
My impressions when I was real young, it was starting to decay, but not too bad. As I got older, probably into my early teens, there was an awful lot of fires. There was a lot of people not taking care of their property. I didn't think that the state and the city at that point had done enough to keep the beach going. It wasn't until after the blizzard of '78 that the state, I guess, put any money into renovating the pavilions. Where through the years they had taken a beating, and after the blizzard of '78, the slate came off the pavilions, and why should it have taken a blizzard?
Every little thing took something away, and finally people started to let the property get a little run down. And then, of course, the various fires that happened also didn't help.
I often think of Revere, having spent so much of my youth there. We lived in a broken-down apartment house right on the corner of the Boulevard and Revere Street. At night, I would fall asleep with the ocean's roar and the distant organ music from Hurley's merry-go-round. I suppose most of my contemporaries are gone by now. The Rollers, Baldy Murphy, Etta Hearn. They are all very old now, those that are still alive. I know because I am old. My mind is still young, but longevity is a great mystery. Why some live long and others leave early has always been bewildering to me. But it will not be long before I have the answer. Jack Haley, March 15th, 1977.
I feel that I am grateful that my parents decided to settle in Revere, so that as a child I had the privilege and the pleasure of enjoying all that it did for us. I think it was great in many, many ways. I didn't like to see the change, but we have to accept change, unfortunately. But I loved my youth in Revere. I really did. And I think the beach is the main reason.